What is a slug in Django? When I read Django code, I often see in models what is called a slug. I am not quite sure what this is, but I do know it has something to do with URLs. How and when is this slug thing supposed to be used? I have read its definition in this glossary. Slug, a short label for something, containing only letters, numbers, underscores, or hyphens. They're generally used in URLs. For example, in a typical blog entry URL. This URL, the last bit, spring, is the slug.
A slug is a way of generating a valid URL, generally using data already obtained. For instance, a slug uses the title of an article to generate a URL. I advise to generate the slug by means of a function, given the title or another piece of data, rather than setting it manually. An example. Now let's pretend that we have a Django model such as how would you reference this object with a URL and with a meaningful name? You could, for instance, use article ID so the URL would look like this. Or you might want to reference the title like this. Since spaces aren't valid in URLs, they must be replaced by %20, which results in. Both attempts are not resulting in very meaningful, easy-to-read URL. This is better. In this example, the 46-year-old version is a slug. It is created from the title by downcasing all letters and replacing spaces by hyphens dash. Also see the URL of this very web page for another example.
The term slug comes from the world of newspaper production. It's an informal name given to a story during the production process. As the story wins its path from the beat reporter, assuming these even exist anymore, through to editor through to the printing presses, this is the name it is referenced by, e.g., have you fixed those errors in the Kate and William story? Some systems, such as Django, use the slug as part of the URL to locate the story, an example being www.mizit.com archives the Kate and William. Even Stack Overflow itself does this, with the Jebish, a self-referential https://stackoverflow. Although you can replace the slug with blah blah, and it will still find it okay. It may even date back earlier than that, since screenplays had slug lines at the start of each scene, which basically sets the background for that scene, where, when, and so on. It's very similar, in that it's a precis, or preamble of what follows. On a linotype machine, a slug was a single-line piece of metal, which was created from the individual letter forms. By making a single slug for the whole line, this greatly improved on the old character-by-character compositing. Although the following is pure conjecture, an early meaning of slug was for a counterfeit coin, which would have to be pressed somehow. I could envisage that usage being transformed to the printing term, since the slug had to be pressed using the original characters, and from there, changing from the piece of metal definition to the story summary definition. From there, it's a short step from proper printing to the online world. A. Gödel-Escher, Bach, by one Douglas Hofstadter, which I, at least, consider one of the great modern intellectual works. You should also check out his other work, Metamagical the Mars.
If I may provide some historical context. The term slug has to do with casting metal, lead, in this case, out of which the press fonts were made. Every paper then had its fonts factory regularly remelted and recast in fresh molds, since after many prints they became worn out. Apprentices like me started their career there, and went all the way to the top, not anymore. Typographs had to compose the text of an article in a backward manner with lead characters stacked in a wise. So at printing time the letters would be straight on the paper. All typographs could read the newspaper mirrored as fast as the printed one. Therefore the slugs, like snails, also the slow stories, the last to be fixed, were many on the bench waiting, solely identified by their fist letters, mostly the whole title generally more readable. Some hot news were waiting there on the bench, for possible last-minute correction, evening paper, before last assembly and definitive printing. Django emerged from the offices of the Lawrence Journal in Kansas, where probably some printing jargon still lingers. A Django enthusiast and friendly old slug boy from France.
Slug is a newspaper term. A slug is a short label for something, containing only letters, numbers, underscores or hyphens. They are generally used in URLs, as in Django docs. A slug field in Django is used to store and generate valid URLs for your dynamically created web pages. Just like the way you added this question on Stack Overflow and a dynamic page was generated, and when you see in the address bar you will see your question title with dash in place of the spaces. That's exactly the job of a slug field. The title entered by you was something like this dash. What is a slug in Django? On storing it into a slug field it becomes, what is a slug in Django? See URL of this page.
If you want to support the channel, please consider liking and subscribing.